Joining us now to analyze the coverage in New York, Rich Lowry, editor-in-chief of National Review. And in Los Angeles, Leslie Marshall, the radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Rich, you write that there was a media-imposed taboo against even talking about the possibility of a lab leak at Wuhan. And you say much of that had to do with Donald Trump. Explain.
Yeah, well, first of all, the media is supposed to report the information. It's not supposed to try to control the information, and that's what we've seen in recent years, and this is perhaps the most flagrant and worst example of that. And one of the reasons that the media did this, they just assumed, because they don't like and distrust Donald Trump, that he must have been wrong when he suggested that this was at least an open question. And one of the things, though, you should learn as a journalist from the 2 weeks after you pick up your pad and paper and start reporting wherever you're reporting, is that people you dislike or distrust might occasionally be right. And it's bizarre, Howie, that we have to say this to journalists, but they should have kept an open mind, and they didn't at all on this. Right,
and sometimes if your political adversaries support one view, you might take the other view. So, Leslie, is it embarrassing to look back now and see how anybody with a contrary view on the origin of COVID-19, and we didn't know at the time, was mocked and minimized as a conspiracy nut?
No, I don't think it's embarrassing. I think there were really two schools of thought, and sadly, it seemed to come down along political lines. There were people, I would add to what Rich said, I do agree with a couple of things. You know, journalists are supposed to report the facts. And second, there were ties to negative feelings about former President Donald Trump. But the ties to him went further, and it wasn't just about the lab leak. It was about the way he was characterizing the virus and the anger and the resentment toward the AAPI community that was spreading throughout this country, as we saw when COVID first came on. Look, what we were doing, I think, at least on my side, and for me, I was saying I want to listen to the scientists on this, because prior to COVID, as far as we know, there has never been a virus linked to a lab leak. They've always been able to link it to an animal, such as a rodent or a bat and things like that, that were sold in this market. Now, that we found was just proven by DNA. But still, like you said, we may never know. So I don't think it's embarrassing. But I also don't think Tom Cotton, when we talk about an investigation, I don't think that investigation needs to play out on Facebook.
Well, Facebook is one of the entities, a giant social media site that literally would not let you even entertain the theory. And I guess I disagree with you on how some of this looks in retrospect. Rich, how much of this had to do with journalistic feelings about social justice?
Yeah, well, I think Leslie just hit on the point. The presumption was that if you said it came from a lab instead of from a wet market, that somehow was anti-Chinese or anti-Asian American, which makes no sense. There's no connection whatsoever. You know, the CCP doesn't represent all Asians or all Asian Americans. It's a communist regime that evidence points to that this may have leaked from the lab. We'll probably never ultimately know. And they covered it up. That's on the communists. That's on Beijing. It's not on Asians in general. I mean, that's a ridiculous idea. But clearly, this was another reason the media wanted to shut this down. And, you know, Leslie said the investigation shouldn't have gone on Facebook, but the debate should have, right? Yeah. And we had this on all aspects of COVID. There should have been an open debate, and you shouldn't have been trying to shut down one side of the debate. And we just saw it over and over again.
Well, let me just mention that I understand the Energy Department finding was reached with low confidence, but the FBI says this with medium confidence. But the question of Facebook, Leslie, is should Facebook apologize or at least express some regret for deleting posts by anybody who had a different point of view about something that is now believed by the FBI and part of the Biden administration?
No, I mean, come on. Facebook started out to be almost like Tinder, and you rated girls on a scale of 1 to 10, and now it's become what? We have friends, and we have a lot of falsities on Facebook. Facebook is not a news outlet. It is a private company that makes money, and that's what they're about doing.
It is one of the most important. It is one of the most important media companies, although this doesn't describe itself that way, on the planet. And we're talking about 2020, when it certainly was wrapped up in a lot more politics than it wasn't just looking to find women for guys.
Look, because Facebook is a social media company. It is not a news network. The news networks across the board, cable and non-cable, should have covered this, as well as radio, print, online news sources. Facebook, you have a lot of people out there that are giving disinformation, whether it's about the lab, or whether it was at the time about Dr. Fauci and other scientists and medical professionals, and that could be dangerous. We were living in a pocket of a four-letter word called fear with COVID. Fear about everything. Fear about what we said. Fear about what we thought. Does it make it right? No. In hindsight, which is always 2020, do we learn? Yes. But does Facebook need to apologize or explain? I just don't think so.
Well, Rich, I'd like you to pick up that point. You might have a different view of Facebook's role. And also, just as part of the question, is it hard for journalists, or should it not matter, to go up against experts say, scientists say, when there's a consensus? And sometimes, of course, these things turn out to be wrong.
Well, journalists should be willing to question authority. They used to be willing to do it, and should go and seek out the dissenters. Maybe the dissenters are wrong and crazy, but at least take them seriously and air their views. And very often in these stories, that did not happen. And social media, like it or not, is just a huge source of news and information for people. That's why there's been this struggle for years over what the rules will be and whether one side of the debate will be shut down or disfavored. And that happened for the reasons, the rationale that Leslie is outlining here. The one point of view was presumed to be disinformation and therefore dangerous. So there was okay to suppress the views about the vaccines, about masks, and about the lab. And that is just wrong. It's un-American. There should be a lively debate about this, because very often the people that the establishment thinks are wrong or crazy are right or have a point. And that was obviously the case here.
So, Leslie, it seems like it comes down to this question of controlling speech. There's a big debate, of course, about this under Elon Musk with Twitter, which is the antithesis of free speech. So what if those taking the contrary position turn out to be right? Now, a lot of times they're wrong or they're off. But this isn't like a clear and present danger. Don't take the vaccine. It will kill you. It may well have come from the Wuhan lab.
Again, yes, absolutely. But, you know, I have 6 colleagues, talk show hosts, who died because they refused to take the vaccine. They refused to wear a mask. They refused to believe that COVID was as dangerous as it was being said. They presented conspiracy theories, and they're 6 feet under right now, and their families suffer from that, as well as their listeners or viewers. And I think what happened with many of the social media companies is they were terrified of 2 things. They were terrified of being a part of any of that. They were also terrified about losing their bottom line because they're businesses, and they didn't want to turn out to be wrong. And I think most people, myself included, at the time, were believing the scientists and the medical community because they had the most experience with viruses long before COVID, and many viruses most of us have never and still have never heard of.
Well, the irony is they turned out to be wrong, and they suppressed the wrong. If they're trying to suppress the falsities, they ended up on the wrong side, which is why everyone should have a dose of modesty when there are big, uncertain, unsettled questions like where it came from. Let everyone air their views and let people decide. That's what a free society does, and what we should do in the United States of America.
Wait. Let me just say this then. Then such Facebook air all Holocaust deniers? I mean, let's keep. How far does this go? Because it could be a slippery slope. And if you think of it in terms of a company, and you sit there and you put on the business person CEO's cap, where is that line where you say, okay, I got to shut this down until we have more evidence, until we know this is true and not just a conspiracy theory?
They should have a First Amendment-based standard, broadly First Amendment-based. Incitement and things of that nature shouldn't exist. Otherwise, there should be a free debate, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. And it's what you sign up for if you live in the United States. At least that used to be the case. I
got to get a break, Leslie. I'm sorry to hear about your colleagues, but I do think the core of this is free speech. When we come back, the cancellation of Dilbert and how creator Scott Adams is now insisting his offensive video wasn't racist. The fallout from the total cancellation of Dilbert has been growing louder. Creator Scott Adams blew up his career with racist comments on his YouTube show, with hundreds of papers led by the Washington Post, LA Times, USA Today dropping the strip after Adams, among other things, called black people a hate group. But in more recent videos, Adams insisted that what he said wasn't racist and blamed the demise of Dilbert on the press. So, Rich Lowry, Adams began with a poll showing a slight majority of blacks agreeing it's okay to be white. And then he goes to black people are a hate group, and now he says, well, that was hyperbole. Sounds like kind of a lame defense to me.
Yeah, so generally, when someone steps in it, I just want an apology and everyone to move on. But this was so flagrant, and the explanations and defenses make no sense, because as we saw in that clip you played, he said all black people are a hate group, and you should stay away from black people, right? All black people. There's no way to characterize it except for racism, a racist. And then he comes back and says, well, I'm all about individuals, which is fine, which is correct, but that totally contradicts what he said. So he was aware of the consequences when he said this. That was so striking. But once it happened, he obviously had some regrets.
Yeah. Leslie, Scott Adams now says what he meant was that black people disproportionately live in poor neighborhoods, and in poor neighborhoods you're more likely to have a high crime rate. Look, he's a writer. He knows the impact of words, and he didn't say it that way. He said, stay the hell away from black people.
He said nothing like what he's claiming he meant. Sorry. I've honestly, I think I've seen Dilbert once in my life. I'm very familiar with it, although not a follower. But I was on a panel the other day where one of the guys was a huge Scott Adams fan. He would listen to his podcast, and he also would read Dilbert. And at first, before the backpedaling, he said, I bet he did this on purpose. He's got tons of money. He wants to retire. And, he just kind of wants to throw a grenade and watch everybody scatter. But clearly, that's not the case. Look, I think it's racist for anybody to say that it's not okay to be whatever color you are, because we're all born the color we are. We don't have a choice in that. Whether it's a black person saying it's not okay to be white, or it's a white person saying it's not okay to be black. But what's also not okay is what Scott Adams said. That is also blatant racism, and I think it was the right decision that the company made. And I know people say cancel, but I think I tweeted this morning he canceled himself. That's one of the hashtags.
So Howie, let me stick up for editors here, because obviously it's incredibly powerful. Just turn on your computer, have the video camera, and reach tens of thousands of people or whatever it is. But it's also dangerous, right? Because if he had colleagues or an editor, and he might have said, oh, there's this Rasmussen poll, this is going to be my hot take on it. The editor might have said, Scott, that's not a good idea. Think that one through again. But instead he clicks it on, he says it, and now he'll be backpedaling for years and years and years trying to explain this away.
Being a sole practitioner has its positives and negatives, but clearly he knew what he was doing, it seemed. And I've been wondering, Leslie, why this fabulously successful cartoonist once had 2,000 papers seems so angry. And he says on one video that at the 2 previous jobs at banks that he worked before he started Dilbert, he was told by his boss that he couldn't be promoted because he was white. So the whole white resentment theory, which has been, around for decades, including in newsrooms, coming to bear on this, I think.
I didn't like that he said reverse race discrimination. Discrimination is discrimination, I mean, no matter how you cut it. I've been the victim, believe it or not, with a boss who was a different color than myself, blatantly telling me, because of my skin color, but you just move on. You don't work at, for that individual. And, success is the best revenge, I always say. This clearly just adds to, this is not what he meant was minority neighborhoods and impoverished neighborhoods and disproportionate, situations for African Americans. What he clearly meant was he's angry and bitter about things that happened in his life, and he's built up, and he's blaming an entire community and warning everybody of his skin color to stay away from that community, and that's racism 101.
Right, but then those jobs were a long time ago, and in fact, Adams lost some subscribers to Dilbert. The final reason this is done, by the way, is because his distributor dropped him along with his agent when he created a character called Dave the Black Engineer to mock workplace diversity. But I still come back to, and you touched on it, Rich, why Scott Adams would do this. He obviously had a lot going for him. It seems to me blaming the media and reporters and not giving you the proper context is a last resort.
Yeah, and it could have been that he just figured, well, I have this independent platform, I've made a lot of money, and I can just do my own thing. But clearly he regrets it, and there's just a huge reputational hit, right, to what he said. And he's, as I say, he's going to have to try to explain it away. And it's true that DEI and this whole industry is based on creating a racial pecking order and a kind of racialism that is hideous and un-American, but in no way justifies what Adams said.
I think we can agree on that, and it's just sort of sad, and there really is no defense. Thank you both, Leslie Marshall, Rich Lowry. Great to see you this Sunday.